Good morning. How is everyone this Wednesday? Today I'm going to be sharing a little bit from the Dr. Atkins Diet Revolution book, his very first book that he wrote. I would like people to understand where I'm coming from with the information that I share. So that's pretty much where I've gotten all of my information and a little bit of research before I read it. But I just, I kind of want to let you know what I know. So the people that haven't read this book, I'm hoping that they will understand, because a lot of people are misguided about the Atkins diet. And I think the history of where it came from and things like that are really important. And even if you don't want to follow this diet, I think it's important because people are so negative when it comes to low carb. But if you understood the science behind it, then maybe they wouldn't be like that. So I'd like to just kind of start going through this book, and I'm going to read the first chapter. It's only 10 pages. So I just want to put that out there today, and we'll see how it goes. At any rate, if you have any comments as we go through it, please leave the comments. So the first chapter is called What This Book Will Reveal to You. Millions of words have been written and spoken about overweight. By now, everybody knows everything about it, except what causes it and how to get rid of it. I am constantly amazed at even how few physicians are treating the real cause of overweight. No wonder it doesn't go away. Revolutionize your ideas about the cause of overweight. Are you thinking, but surely it is caused just by overeating? Not so. This is one of those assumptions we have always taken for granted, one of the many myths about overweight. Now it is time to unlearn. We're still working on that. Everybody thinks, oh, well, that person must eat too much. And sometimes it's a medical problem. Metabolic imbalance causes most overweight. For 50 years, ever since the first best-selling diet book appeared, doctors and dietitians have been telling us that losing is just a matter of adjusting your calorie intake and eating a balanced diet. But most people, and that includes doctors and dietitians, are totally ignorant of the metabolic imbalance that is the primary cause of almost all overweight. The result of 50 years of prescribing a so-called balanced diet for patients who actually were suffering from metabolic imbalance is a raging national epidemic of overweight. A revolution in our diet thinking is long overdue. Overweight brings many problems with it. Our biggest health problem today, cardiovascular disease, is closely linked with overweight. So is diabetes, heightened accident and surgical risk, hyperinsulinism, arthritis, diseases of the kidneys, liver, gallbladder, even suicide. This book was written in 1972. Not much has changed. How is this a diet revolution? If a revolution is a successful revolt against entrenched order, then the last 8 years of my practice represents one. I'll be telling you more about how it all happened in the next few chapters. But to sum up, I've treated 10,000 patients for overweight in that time. They have all lost weight without counting calories, without diet pills, and most without feeling a single pang of hunger. They haven't lost by eating less of a balanced diet. To begin with, this diet isn't balanced. It is deliberately unbalanced. The reason to counteract the metabolic imbalance that causes people to get fat in the first place. You see, most balanced diets are around 50% carbohydrate, 30% protein, 20% fat. Overweight people usually have a disturbed carbohydrate metabolism, so they can't handle that much carbohydrate. In this diet, we first cut out carbohydrates altogether, then keep them cut way down permanently. In other words, you're extremely limited the first 2 weeks, and then after that, you start adding a little bit and a little bit until you find what works for you. This is a no hunger diet. One of the happy side effects of this deliberately unbalanced therapeutic diet is the fantastic change that it brings about in your hunger pattern. My patients lose whether they eat more or less on this no hunger diet. Most people eat less, but it's only because what they get on this diet so completely satisfies their hunger, they find they just can't eat as much as they used to. I found that myself. But some have lost 30, 40, 100, or more pounds while consuming 2,000 or 3,000 calories or more a day. Enough to make the point that if you want to eat that much, you still can lose. They've lost weight on bacon and eggs for breakfast, on heavy cream in their coffee, on mayonnaise in their salads, butter sauce on their lobster, on spare ribs, roast duck, pastrami, on my special cheesecake for dessert. The recipe is in this book. And on this diet, cholesterol levels usually go down, and even more important, triglyceride levels. You'll learn about this in the recipe chapter. Almost always go down. My patients have shed years along with the pounds. They have gained energy, cheerfulness, self-confidence. They're new people, and they no longer count calories. This is because I don't believe that losing weight is a simple matter of counting calories and of just operating the body on a calorie deficit. The calorie counting approach has failed. Orthodox medicine's conspicuous lack of success in treating overweight hasn't caused the profession to search widely for alternatives to calorie counting approaches. Instead, other events have taken place. Sorry about that. A gigantic low-calorie food and drink industry has exploded into being. The drug industry has produced a multicolored Niagara of diet pills. Have all these appetite suppressants and all these low-calorie victuals and drinks turned us from a fat nation into a trim nation? You know the answer. Every year, more of us worry about overweight, and rightly so. For every year in our increasingly sedentary society, more of us age and die prematurely from diseases linked with faulty diet and overweight. The calorie counting approach to the problem of our national overweight has failed. You'll read more about this in Chapter 8. There are two major reasons why calorie counting has failed to trim us down. First, few people can tolerate the hunger that goes with a low-calorie diet long enough to succeed in losing much weight. Excuse me. And as I mentioned earlier, there is that other, even more basic reason why calorie counting has failed us. Many of today's diseases have one predisposing factor in common: carbohydrate intolerance. Over the years, a large number of doctors and medical researchers have observed that the overweight person, the diabetic, the hypoglycemic, that's a person suffering from a low level of blood sugar, the heart attack prone, all have one thing in common. Something is very wrong with the way their bodies handle sugar and other carbohydrates. These people are carbohydrate intolerant due to a metabolic imbalance. What we need now is a diet revolution in which carbohydrate intake is cut to fit the tolerance of carbohydrate intolerant people. Then, and only then, can overweight with all its dangers be controlled. Why hasn't medicine explored the deadly role of carbohydrates? How can so many nutrition experts not be aware of carbohydrate intolerance? Why have the medical authorities for so long ignored rather than explored this logical lead to the treatment of overweight? What is the explanation for the blind eye that has been turned on the flood of medical reports on the causative role of carbohydrates in overweight ever since the publication in 1864 of William Banting's famous Letter of Corpulence? Could it be related in part to the vast financial endowments poured into the various departments of nutritional education by the manufacturers of our refined carbohydrate foodstuffs? We're the victim of carbohydrate poisoning. The most killing diseases of the 20th century stem from what I call carbohydrate poisoning. What causes that? Mainly sugar. In many cases, virtually a sugar addiction. As Dr. John Yudkin points out, we consume more sugar now in 2 weeks than we did in a year 2 centuries ago. And this is in 1972. He said we consumed more sugar in 2 weeks than in a year a century ago. I can imagine that's probably doubled by now. For decades now, Americans have been brainwashed by advertisers to start the day with processed cereals and fill up the hours afterward with soft drinks that contain no nutritive value, only carbohydrates. As cavemen, we humans evolved mainly on a diet of meat, and that's what our bodies were and are built to handle. For 50 million years, our bodies had to deal with only minute amounts of carbohydrates and unrefined carbohydrates at that. 7,000 years ago, when man learned to till the soil, the quantity of carbohydrates man consumed increased, but they were still unrefined. In other words, these carbohydrates were not artificially concentrated by a milling or refining process. Only over the last century has a drastic change come about with the advent of a diet predominantly composed of refined carbohydrates. The mechanism meant to metabolize the original tiny quantity we consumed has broken down under the killing onslaught of our Coke, cake, ketchup, cookies, and candy bar culture. The result? Overweight. Also, cardiovascular disease, which accounts for the majority of deaths from all causes, plus a whole spectrum of degenerative diseases previously unheard of. The No Hunger RX for overweight. Cut carbohydrates, not calories. Understanding the cause can point the way to the correct treatment. Removing carbohydrates from the diet is the most permanently effective treatment for overweight. One of the reasons that it is remarkably effective is because when you take away carbohydrates, you take away hunger. There's a biologic basis for this astonishing phenomenon, which you'll read about later. There's no need to count calories. You eat and eat, to your heart's content, never hungry, always losing. You may be thinking, but surely my body needs some carbohydrates. This is another of those preconceptions so deeply embedded in our thinking. And I'm talking about doctors' minds here as well as patients, that it seems incredible that it isn't true. But the thing is, we do add in carbohydrates as we go, so we're not without carbohydrates. We need to unlearn. But with our total body of knowledge exploding so in size, a big problem today for all of us is not to learn, but to unlearn. And this idea about the need for carbohydrates is one of those old assumptions that just doesn't hold anymore. One of the legion of yesterday's truths that have become today's fictions. People and animals very likely can survive quite well. Also, use fats and proteins directly as sources of energy. We are told in the famous Department of Agriculture book, Composition of Foods, 1963. Philip K. Bondi, chairman of the Department of Internal Medicine at Yale University Medical School, and now the editor of Duncan's Disease of Metabolism, a textbook that is virtually a Bible for doctors in this field, writes, "No carbohydrate is required in the diet. It has been shown experimentally that human beings can survive in good health for months on a diet of meats and fats." And of course, carnivorous man survived for millions of years in a relatively low carbohydrate world. The total turnabout in man's diet, to the point where refined carbohydrates dominate it, has caused an evolutionary maladaptation that shows itself not just in adults, but even in the young. The damage done by carbohydrates starts early. Arteries show damage startlingly early in life. Autopsies performed on many of the casualties of both the Korean War and the war in Vietnam show grossly visible fatty deposits, atheromata, of the aortic wall in half these young men. Their average age was 22. In other words, their arteries already showed signs of serious damage, which many recent studies attribute to years of overconsumption of refined carbohydrates, along with a genetic predisposition to cardiovascular disease. For carbohydrates, not fat, are the principal elements of food that fatten fat people. They do this both by preventing you from burning up your own fat and by stimulating your body to make more fat and by being used to make that fat. Protein and fat combinations alone do not do this. So this diet is an anti-carbohydrate diet, which takes off weight that low-calorie diets won't affect at all. I gotta get a drink. You can go ahead and leave your thoughts in the comments as well if you'd like. Let's see, where was I? 93 pounds less weight, more energy. Lynn Duddy, who writes the music for the Jackie Gleason show, for years had tried every diet going without success, but then lost 93 pounds on his own personal limited edition of the anti-carbohydrate diet. "I loathe fish. I hate cheese," he says. "So I live pretty much on steak, chicken, and green salads. It wasn't difficult. For breakfast, I had all the bacon and eggs I could get into me, and I could have mayonnaise on my lettuce and butter on my meat. I didn't know before I began that I had low blood sugar, but I did know that I didn't have much energy. I have a lot more now. The diet that treats overweight and all its deadly relatives. But this diet isn't just a reducing diet. It's the medical treatment of choice for most people with adult onset diabetes, with cholesterol problems, with ulcer problems, with migraine, with heart and arterial disease, and especially for the fatigue and emotional disturbances that accompany hypoglycemia. All of these human scourges and half a dozen others can have their roots in a common cause, a metabolic I have a problem with that word, a metabolic disturbance resulting from the body's inability to deal with carbohydrates. In the past, we have found that uncovering the cause of a disease has made its control possible. This is no less true of these 20th century diseases. It treats the cause as well as the symptoms. It is possible right now to control all those diseases, starting with the unsightly, life-shortening condition of overweight. I know this diet will work for you. It has worked on the thousands of patients who have come to me for treatment. More than that, it has apparently worked for thousands of patients who have not come to me for treatment, but who have just read about the diet in the magazines and newspapers that have written about it. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Town and Country, Cosmopolitan, Mademoiselle, and Fortune, among others. I know this book can change your life. Every time the diet has appeared, I have received thousands of letters from all over this country and around the world. People write me that they find the diet easy to follow, that they are amazed and delighted at never being hungry. They write that they feel absolutely on top of the world, a great mood change, and they write that they are losing weight happily and effortlessly, that they like themselves now, that the diet has changed their lives. I even hear from their doctors about diabetic and hypertensive conditions that the diet has corrected, about lowered cholesterol and triglyceride levels, in addition to dramatic losses in weight alone. One thing I have learned is that there's no fixed formula that works for everybody. What I hope this book will do for you is steer you into an eating pattern that is best suited to you, your particular metabolism, tastes, habits, customs, likes, and dislikes. Because if you have a weight problem, then you have a problem for life. We doctors know this, but it's amazing how few patients can accept this self-evident fact. So that's the end of that chapter. And like right at the end there, he said it's to be customized. That was the whole intention when he created this. He cut out the carbs, and you'll find out in another chapter of how this came about. But he was overweight himself, and then he figured out that the carbs were the problem. And once he did that, he lost his double chin. He was really upset about that. But it was really an amazing breakthrough for that time. And now keto has made us popular, so maybe that's a lot of the reason people don't want to do it. I found myself thinking that for a while. I did this back in early 2000s, and I had some success, but at that time I wasn't dedicated enough. And now I've started it again. I've done this for 14 months and lost 20 pounds. And a lot of that time, I was not even, really into it. I was slipping up all the time. I was screwing up. I was making mistakes. I was cheating. But once I read this book and I got back in the mindset again, I've done really well. So I can only imagine how much weight we can all lose this year. So that's why I want to share about this book, is to help you to understand the science and what's behind it so that we can all do a better job. And, if Atkins isn't for you, if keto isn't for you, that's okay. I'd still like to educate. But that is all I really have for today. So I will really try to see you next week.